Alright guys, hope you're doing really well. Today we're going to be talking about our last lesson of the week, which is going to be taxes in the United States. How are they collected? Who gets them? How do you pay them? Do I have to pay them? And all sorts of different stuff. So let's dive right in. So, taxes. Taxes are a mandatory contribution to state revenue. So if I ask the question, do you have to pay taxes? The answer is yes, it's mandatory. If you don't, the IRS comes after you, and then we never see you again. We will see you again. It's just you'll be in trouble. As you know, there are many different ways that the government can collect taxes. Can you name at least one of them? I know you guys can, because I've already asked this question before this year, and you guys got it right. Sales tax. This is a tax you guys already pay, even though you guys do not make any money because you don't have jobs currently. But you still pay this form of tax. Whenever you purchase a good or a service in, we'll just say Florida, because sales tax is different depending on which state you're in, the government of Florida takes about 6%, 6.5% out of the total transaction. And then that money goes towards stuff like government programs, road maintenance, welfare programs, protect the orange trees, whatever the government needs money for. So, long story short, that's one way you pay, or the government collects taxes. It's through your transactions. That's why you pay a little bit more on top of a transaction. You might think that sales tax is not that big of a deal, but when you get to buying stuff that's like really expensive, you'll see that it actually does make a huge difference. Case in point, try finding 6% of like the value of a new car. So take like $30,000 and times it by 6%. That's how much you'd have to pay on top of the price on the car. Yikes. Anywho, let's go on to our next form of tax, income tax. So the government also takes money away from your paycheck. Before you receive any of your income from your paycheck, your employer will take out a certain percentage from your paycheck and give it to the federal government for income tax. Now, the federal government, as in the one in Washington, D.C., does this, but some state governments also do this. Fortunately for you, you live in Florida and there is no state income tax, so I'm not going to really dive too deep into that. It's one of the nice perks of living in Florida. Otherwise, you'd be taxed twice. But anywho, have you ever noticed this spot, though? This space on the Monopoly board where you land on income tax and you either pay 10% or $200. Most people just do the $200 because they can't be bothered to figure out what 10% is. But I like that pay 10% because that's how taxes work. You're not doing a fixed like numbers and you must pay like $1,000. It's all percentage based. Here's the 2013 federal tax rate brackets. Now, I would show you more updated ones. However, the tax code literally changes every single year, so it really doesn't matter too much. And when I mean they change every year, it's kind of like minor changes. But here's how the tax rate basically works. Notice where it says, like at the beginning, it says tax rate, and you have a percentage when it comes to your tax rate. It starts at 10%, and then it goes all the way up to 39.6% tax. And notice where it says on the next category there, single, as if you were filing your taxes on your own. Notice how the numbers are different depending on which column you're in. You only pay a certain percentage of your income based upon what your income is. So if you're making anywhere between $0 and $8,925, that's not particularly a whole lot of money. So the tax percentage is lower. Versus if you go all the way at the bottom and you see that the highest is $400,000 plus, you're making a lot of money in a year. So the tax rate is a lot higher. It's nearly 40%. Then you have the other things where it's like if you're a married person or you're filing jointly, or if you're a qualifying widower, you're the head of the household, married, filing separately. It just depends. People's situations are all different. But the concept is the same. Depending on how much money you make, depends on which percentage is going to be taken out for income tax. Now, there's one more kind of tax that we have to talk about, and this is one that most seventh graders don't think of. Is there anybody in the virtual room in my head who can tell me what that is? I'm going to assume Zeke knew this because Zeke knows a ton. Tariffs/duties. A tariff is a tax to be paid on imports or exports. So when it comes to like importing and exporting goods into the country, whether it be the newest iPhone, whether it be a new TV, whether it be like a car like a Ferrari, the government of the United States collects a tax on certain goods like that. That's known as a tariff. So just because simply something is brought into the country, the government will tax you on it. Um, and I could go on and on and on with like examples of this, but I think you guys get the basic idea of this. There are your notes on the three different types of taxes. It's pretty straightforward. Income tax is money taken out of your paycheck. Sales tax is money added on top of your purchases. And tariffs are money taken to import/export items in and out of the country. Taxes are mandatory. Make sure you pay them. Don't want to hear that my former students have been tracked down by the IRS. Same goes for me. I don't want to be tracked down by the IRS either. Anywho, so we've talked about the three types of taxes, but there's also three different ways to collect that taxes, as in what percentages you'll do with those taxes. The government will decide what those percentages are. I'm just merely going to show you what they could be, and I'll show you which one we ultimately do. So let's go right to it. The first is a proportional tax system, and all governments around the world have to decide what type of tax system they're going to do. So these are the three types of tax systems they can do, and it's just going to affect the percentages they take out. So let's look at this one first. A proportional tax is a tax imposed so that the tax rate is fixed. In other words, you remember at the beginning, and I'll show it to you guys right now, you notice how in our country the tax rate goes up as when you're making more money as a person? Well, in a proportional tax rate system, the tax rate doesn't change depending on your income level. Now, the money does change because everybody has different income levels. So you'll notice in this example here, the tax rate is the same for all three of these people with three different incomes, but ultimately they'll be paying differently. The person with 20,000 income is going to be paying $2,000 in tax. The person with 30,000 will be paying 3,000 in tax, and the person with 50,000 will be paying 5,000 in tax. The tax rate, though, is the same. It's equal. Some people might pay more, but the percentage is fair. So the benefits of this is that it's probably the most fair tax system there is. I mean, everybody pays the same percentage. Not the same amount of money, because everybody makes different amount of money, but the percentage is the same. And a lot of people kind of think that that's a good idea. Should you have to pay a bigger percentage just because you make a lot more money? I mean, at the end of the day, why should someone who's making $1 million be taxed 40% when some person who's making $20,000 is getting taxed 15%? Not advocating this system or disagreeing with it, but I'm just kind of showing you guys the pros of it. Or should everyone pay the exact same percentage regardless of income? That would be the most fairest thing out there. It's the idea of everybody being equal. That's what proportional tax is. There's your notes for proportional taxes. Basically, long story short, everybody pays the same tax rate. This is not the one the US goes through, as you saw with the example. Now, a progressive tax system. Now, this is where you get to the US system. This tax system basically says that the more money you make, the higher percentage you should pay in income tax. So if you're making millions of dollars, your percentage should be higher than someone making $15,000. That's the current system we have in the United States. Truth be told, the wealthiest people in the United States pay the most in taxes. That's what the progressive system is designed to do. Now, benefits of this tax system, obviously people with a lot more money would be able to, or maybe definitely would be able to contribute more to better society, or at least to help out the government. And also, people who make the most money can forfeit things, like if your tax rates are higher and you can't quite afford that Ferrari and you got to settle for like a Maserati, you're still driving a Maserati at the end of the day. So that's kind of the mindset behind this tax system. Is it the fairest tax system? No, because I mean the percentages go higher on a certain populace, but it is the one that we currently have. There's your progressive tax notes. And then the last tax system, regressive tax. So if one tax, proportional tax, stays the exact same, and one, progressive, goes up the farther income you get, regressive is like progressive, but in reverse. Regressive taxes are a tax rate that decrease as you increase your income. In other words, the more money you make, the less percentage you'll have. Now, the benefits of this tax system, this one seems a little bit more fairer than the progressive tax system. The higher amount of income you make, the more money you will pay in taxes anyways. So for example, someone who is making $10,000 a year pays 10% taxes. They're ultimately paying $1,000 in taxes. Even if you took the person making $1,000,000 and give them a 1% tax rate, they're still going to give $10,000 in taxes, meaning they gave 10 times the amount of the person who was paying $10,000 in taxes. So it's not too far-fetched of a tax system. It's just the idea of trying to make it more fair as far as the actual dollar amounts you pay in taxes. This is not one that the U.S. does. I'm not actually aware off the top of my head of any country that does this tax plan, but it is out there. There's your notes on regressive taxes. Now, for our last discussion, let's talk a little bit about something known as GDP. GDP is an acronym for something known as Gross Domestic Product. It's the total value of goods produced and the services produced in a country for 1 year. GDP basically is how much money a country is making at each year. If it helps you learn it, then you could even quote me on it if you wish. GDP is basically how much money each country is making each year. There you go, Mr. Shoens, 7th grade civics class. Well done. Quote me on it. Here's a little data just to kind of give you an idea of the United States GDP each year. So this is, again, how much money the U.S. is making each year. So about 2016, we made about $18.57 trillion in that year. In the year 2017, it was about $19.39 trillion. And then this year, or excuse me, the year after that, 2018, the data for 29 and 2020 are still being figured out because that's a lot of money to figure out. 20.54 trillion US dollars. Again, we are the biggest economy in the world by far. Second biggest is China, and you can kind of see the statistics for China right below it. There are your notes for GDP. If you want to shorthand it, then obviously say it's the amount of money that someone makes in a year. That someone would be a country, as quoted by Mr. Shoens. Anywho, what does the government do with all that money? I love this picture. I love it if you haven't noticed. What does the government do with all this money? Well, they don't put it under a mattress and just do nothing with it. They tend to spend it on many, many things, such as national defense, welfare, infrastructure, like buildings, etc. Here's a chart where it comes to where we spend all of our stuff. Now, it doesn't show like a monetary value, but it does show a percentage-wise. So if you're curious, we spend the most of our money in taxes on healthcare as well as Social Security. And then the third would be military, and then everything else is kind of small. And it kind of gives you, before we get into like specifics of that, it kind of leads to a question about just how does the U.S. like budget all that money? Do they spend this exact amount of money we give them, or do they spend more than that, or is there a surplus somewhere? Well, that kind of goes with the idea of budgeting, so let's talk about that real quick. First, a balanced budget. Just like this elephant is perfectly balanced on this beach ball, a balanced budget is when you have the perfect amount of money being brought in and the perfect amount of money being spent. In other words, in the case of our government, they would bring in taxes that would equal how much it is spending, meaning it would not gain anything, it would not lose anything, it would be balanced. Surplus budgets would be ones where you spend less money than what you bring in. In other words, the government would have leftover money at that point. And a deficit budget is one that they spend more money than what they're bringing in. Unfortunately, that one is us. And it kind of leads to a discussion that I would love to have had more time to go through, our national debt. So the national debt, and a lot of countries have a national debt, but we'll be specifically talking about ours because we live in the United States. The national debt is the total amount of money that a country's government has borrowed by various means. This is basically ours from 2013. It's a lot more now. I would have given you an updated figure, but because of this whole stimulus package, it's probably going to be a whole lot more. But I do have something cooler to show you. With the power of editing, I will show you in 3, 2, 1. Wow, that's a lot of debt. I love this calculator here. It literally is called the US debt clock, and it literally shows you what the debt looks like as far as like historically, as well as what it looks like currently. And you can literally see the money being spent currently. Like this is our national debt right now, $24.9 trillion. When we were in third quarter, it was about $22.7 trillion. And look at how much money is being spent by the second. I mean, we'll just look, and if you really want to, by all means, go to it. But by the time I've been speaking, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and by the end of this day, you'll see millions, if not billions of dollars being spent. In other words, we owe a lot of money to people. And that's because federal spending is way out of control. Every year, Congress has a budget they have to give. And basically, they have to approve a budget, and they cannot spend any more money in that budget than what is allocated. And if they don't have the money brought in from taxes, they have to borrow it. Congress is the one who keeps spending a whole lot of money, and the presidents over the years have always signed what Congress has done because they don't want government to shut down and all that different stuff. I love this picture of Senator Rand Paul when the last time we were doing a budget for the year, because the Congress literally makes a budget every year and they got to approve it in both houses and the president has to sign it. That was the budget right there in his hands, all of those papers. By the way, they have 48 hours to read those papers, and then they have to vote on it. And by the way, do you think that's possible? Rand Paul tried. He tried to read it. He literally live streamed it. It was one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen a politician do, where he literally live streamed him reading it on YouTube for the 48 hours they had, and he couldn't even get through a third of it. I mean, it was hilarious, him like literally ordering pizzas and then him like literally reading it, just like, oh, apparently we're funding $1 billion for an Argentinian clown school. I guess that's great for the clowns and stuff. Anywho, federal spending's out of control. I would love to talk more about it, but we got to move on at this point. But how does the government get money that it doesn't have? Through borrowing. But who do they borrow the money from? James Bond, which is a British secret agent person, which is not who we borrow money from. But we do borrow money from people through the issuing of bonds, which are basically a certificate, an IOU, from the federal government saying, hey, can I borrow some money? And in return, I'll give you more money in the future. You can buy these. Literally, the federal government will issue bonds, and let's say you buy a bond worth $100. Maybe that bond is for like 10 years, and then after 10 years, you can give it back to the federal government, and they might give you $200 in return. It's just like loaning with a bank, but done on a, you can do this if you want to. I would show you guys some bonds if we were in the classroom, but c'est la vie. Who buys those bonds? Ton of people. Foreign governments, us, because they're not a bad investment. I mean, this is the United States government ultimately promising you to pay it back. If it can't keep that promise, well, what is money? It's just a promise. And if it breaks that promise, we got a lot more bigger problems, i.e. hyperinflation, to worry about. Is the national debt a big problem, though? And I just kind of ended this. Everyone says it's a huge, big problem. When I was in middle school, literally that was one of the first things my middle school teacher taught me in economics was like, hey, your generation's going to have to deal with the national debt. Well, my generation is now there, and we have made it worse. What does it ultimately mean for you guys, though? Well, unfortunately, we don't have really as much time to dive into that. Sorry. However, I will just say in short summary, it is definitely something that needs to be addressed in the future. It is as if it is this dog here who's in the house saying that this is fine. Your generation probably is the one that's going to have to make the incredibly tough decisions when it comes to the nation's finances, because the nation's debt is getting a little bit outrageous and out of control, as in there was no reason to let this happen for this long and get this bad. Like, get the fire extinguisher. I would love to talk to you guys about what your thoughts would be on that and engage with you guys a little bit more on that. If you want to, by all means, email me. I would love to have those conversations. We have a lot of debt. Oh, wait, that's not the note slide. Bonds! And that will conclude it when it comes to this section of economics, guys. Be on the lookout next week. We're doing our assessment. Stay tuned.